Updating the rubber donut on a Viking 130. Also replacing the drive coupling on the flywheel with heavier duty drive coupling. Step one is to loosen the 4 bolts that hold the gearbox to the engine. Also disconnect the hose for the gearbox breather system. After the bolts are out, also pull the spacers between the gearbox and the bell housing. Now the gearbox can be lifted out and off the engine. Make sure you don't get gear oil on yourself. Next, we're going to remove the coupling and replace it with a heavier duty coupling. Next, you will need either a 17mm socket with a 12 point. What we've got at the shop is a 1/2 inch drive, 36 volt driver. An air one would work as well, 1/2 inch drive. Or you get your 17mm socket, grind it flat here so there's no lead in, just to get more engagement onto these shallow bolts. If you do it manually, you're going to need a bar on it, of course, and just take a bunch of safety wire through one of these holes and tie the flywheel off in one spot, so when you tighten or undo the bolts, the flywheel or the crankshaft doesn't turn. Now I had that loosened just slightly already, so that's why it generally takes more force than that. The bolts we're going to reuse, and we can remove this and put that aside. As you can see, there's quite a bit of difference in the strength of one part to the next. Okay, put some blue Loctites on the bolts and then get a torque wrench and tighten it to 85 foot-pounds on each of the 6 bolts. As you can see, we rigged up a little contraption here where we just hooked a chain into the flywheel with a bolt through part of the bell housing, and that keeps it from rotating. Next, you want to install your alignment bushing, and that gets replaced every single time the gearbox is removed from the engine. As you notice, there's a little step on the new ones. These are a new kind, and that is because there's also a step down inside the engine. So we'll tap that in place. It's going to take a little bit of force, and then kind of just tap it on each side, and eventually it'll bottom out and straighten it out. So it'll be right there. You can feel it that it has bottomed out. Next, we're going to install the rubber drive couplings. There's 3 of them on the 130 engine and the 110 engine. This skinny part of the coupling is used to drive the gearbox. On the turbo engine, this thicker part that has been separated is used. Now, the engine rotates this way, or counterclockwise, watching the propeller from the front. You want the engine to pull the gearbox, so we need to attach here. When the engine rotates, it pulls the gearbox around. So it goes like this. It doesn't go like this, it goes like this. So just put one on and then the other 2 fit in. Sometimes you can see writing on these rubber donuts, and you can put it together the way that it was when it was cut apart earlier. Piece of masking tape might help around here, just loosely, and then you can pull that off after the gearbox goes in place. Alright, next we're going to put the gearbox on. Just align the center part into the bushing, and then align the pins with the rubber donut, and then the gearbox will go down have to do just maybe a little bit of wiggling. Okay, now once it is down, you might have to tap it a little bit with a rubber mallet against the engine. You will be able to rotate the gearbox, obviously hang on to it, maybe get a helper. It's pretty much going to be close to, when you rotate it clockwise, to hitting this temperature probe here. It has a little bit of clearance when it's done, but that's about the location that you're going to end up with as far as clocking it. And then grab your spacers again and install one at each location with your half-inch bolt that you removed and one washer, and do so at all locations. You'll find that the bolt here by the starter on the underneath side has a clipped washer. Put that back in the same location, and then tighten all the bolts to 70 foot-pounds incremental. Okay, so other than hooking up the oil and adding 16 ounces of gearbox fluid to the reservoir of the 130, this is all now completed. You also might have to hook up your wiring for the temperature probe for the gearbox. Keep in mind that this was for the 130 engine, Viking engine, and that the 110 Viking engine will have a separate video. One thing that's different right off the bat is the torque values. The 130 uses half-inch bolts and the 110 has 3/8 bolts. So rather than 70 foot-pounds, it's going to be 38 to 40 foot-pounds on the 110.